have been taught since childhood that mastery over life comes through control, that the strength of the ego is proven by its ability to manipulate, command, and dominate circumstances. Yet I tell you, in the deepest chambers of the psyche, the opposite truth lies hidden. Control, as the ego conceives it, is an illusion born of fear. It is the desperate grasping of a self that does not yet trust the hidden order of the unconscious. To cling to control is to battle against the very currents of your own soul, and thus against life itself. The moment you relinquish this incessant fight, when you loosen the grip of your conscious will upon the mysterious unfolding of existence, something remarkable occurs. Life begins to bow, not in subservience, but in recognition. It bows because you have aligned yourself with the deeper law, the eternal rhythm that underlies appearances. Life bows because you have ceased to oppose it. And in your surrender, you awaken to the archetypal truth that what is meant for you cannot be forced, and what is not yours will dissolve no matter how tightly you cling. To quit fighting for control does not mean passivity. It is not resignation, nor is it apathy. It is the most courageous gesture of the soul to trust that the unconscious, the self, the greater totality of who you are, carries a wisdom that the limited ego can neither comprehend nor command. The ego is a small island floating on a vast ocean of psyche. It believes itself sovereign. But the tides and storms are directed by forces far older, verwastel, than the conscious mind. When you quit fighting, you do not drown. Rather, you discover that the ocean itself is carrying you toward a destination that had been calling you long before you learned the word control. In every analysis, I encounter this battle between the ego and the unconscious. Patients arrive tormented by anxiety, addiction, obsession, or despair, and beneath all these symptoms lies the same story: the ego's desperate attempt to force life into a narrow mold of certainty. They fear chaos, but what they truly fear is the encounter with their own shadow, their unlived possibilities, their hidden archetypes pressing for expression. Control becomes a shield against the terror of transformation. They hold tightly to their habitual self, even when that self is suffocating them, because to release it would be to enter the unknown. Yet, paradoxically, it is in the very act of letting go that life begins to shape itself around them in ways they never could have orchestrated. The man who relinquishes his obsessive need to appear strong suddenly discovers authentic strength. The woman who stops clinging to a failing relationship discovers the inner marriage to her own soul. The individual who ceases to fight the shadow ceases to be haunted by it, and instead finds that the shadow becomes an ally, a reservoir of energy and vitality. I have seen again and again that the psyche does not bow to control, but it does bow to recognition. The moment one acknowledges the unconscious, honors its images, listens to its symbols and dreams, a harmony arises, life bows, because you are no longer the tyrant, but the listener. You are no longer commanding the river to flow uphill, but surrendering to its natural course. And in that surrender, you discover that the river carries you exactly where you were meant to arrive. Think of the dreams that visit you in the night. You do not control them. They arise unbidden, speaking in images older than language, revealing the archetypal dramas of your soul, a dream of falling, of losing your teeth, of wandering in endless corridors. Such images are not designed to be mastered or dismissed, but to be received as oracles from the unconscious. When you fight to control life, you are fighting the dream, declaring war on the very language of your deeper being. But when you bow before the dream, when you allow its wisdom to penetrate you, the symbols transform you from within. The ancient alchemists knew this secret. They spoke not of control, but of surrender to the opus, the great work which could never be completed by force. They worked with fire and water, earth and air. But behind these elements lay psychic truths. The fire is your passion, your rage, your eros. The water is your unconscious depths. The earth is your body and instinct. The air is your thought and imagination. To attempt to control these elements as if they were lifeless matter is folly. To surrender to their transformative rhythm, to allow the opposites to mingle and generate the third, the transcendent function that is wisdom. In the crucible of surrender, the ego is dissolved and reconstituted, no longer a tyrant, but a servant of the self. I once treated a man who dreamed of a great lion chained in his basement. For years he tried to ignore the dream, terrified of the beast that roared beneath his ordered life. He attempted to control his world meticulously, his work, his family, his daily schedule. But the more he sought control, the more the lion appeared, more ferocious each time. He began to suffer insomnia, panic attacks, even hallucinations. Finally, when he surrendered, when he allowed himself to enter into dialogue with this inner lion, he discovered it was not a threat but the repressed vitality of his own soul, chained by his need for control. In freeing the lion, he freed himself. Life bowed to him, not because he conquered it, but because he honored the living archetype within. To quit fighting for control is to recognize that your destiny is not written by your ego alone. It is woven by forces that transcend you, your ancestral line, your cultural myths, your collective unconscious, and above all, the archetypal self, which holds the pattern of your wholeness. The ego imagines it can plot a straight path from desire to fulfillment, but the self operates by paradox, by detours, by synchronicities that defy logic. Only when you release control can you perceive the golden thread that has been guiding you all along. Control belongs to the realm of fear. Surrender to the realm of love. Control clings to certainty. Surrender embraces mystery. Control divides, surrender unites. And here lies the paradox. When you cease to demand life, obey your will. Life begins to conspire in your favor. The very obstacles you feared become allies. The very losses become initiations. The very darkness becomes the womb of transformation. Do you not see how even the body teaches this truth? Try to force your breath, and it becomes shallow and painful. Release control, and the breath deepens naturally, carrying life into every cell. Try to force sleep, and you remain restless. Release control, and sleep descends as a gift. So too with the psyche, the unconscious will not be coerced. It will not reveal its treasures to the dictator ego. But when approached with humility, reverence, and surrender, it opens its vaults and life bows with abundance. And so, when you quit fighting for control, you enter into the sacred rhythm of individuation. This path is not one of domination, but of dialogue, not of conquest, but of communion. You do not control the archetypes, you relate to them. You do not master the unconscious, you listen to it. You do not dictate to life, you participate in its mystery. And in this dance, life bows, because you have ceased to be its enemy and have become its beloved companion. When you struggle to dominate life, you enter into a neurotic dance, endlessly circling the same patterns without resolution. The more you insist on control, the more you attract the very situations that humiliate your illusion of mastery. A man who obsesses over controlling his finances will meet with inexplicable losses, not because fate is cruel, but because his unconscious demands that he encounter the limits of his grasping. A woman who insists on controlling her relationships discovers betrayal. For the psyche arranges experiences that break down the walls of her rigid defenses. Life does not conspire against you. It conspires to liberate you from the prison of your controlling ego. You see, the unconscious is not simply a storehouse of forgotten memories. It is a living reality, a field of energy and archetypal powers that shape existence from the depths. When you try to control it, you behave like a child commanding a storm to obey. Yet, if you stand before the storm with reverence, if you allow the winds and rains to cleanse and transform you, you realize that the storm is not an enemy but a force of renewal. In this way, life bows to the one who bows first, who surrenders not out of weakness but out of recognition that the ego is but one servant in the temple of the self. Consider the shadow, that dark reservoir of unlived life within you. Most people try to control it, to suppress the impulses, desire, and fears that contradict their conscious image. They police their own psyche, constructing elaborate defenses to maintain control over appearances. But the shadow does not vanish. It grows stronger, hidden, until it bursts forth in projections, compulsions, and destructive patterns. The harder you fight it, the more it dominates you in secret. Yet when you quit fighting, when you cease trying to control the shadow and instead acknowledge it, something miraculous occurs. The shadow becomes not a monster to be slain, but a guide to your wholeness. Its energy, once repressed, returns as vitality, creativity, and passion. Life bows because you have stopped waging war against yourself. I recall a patient who dreamt of wandering endlessly through a labyrinth. Each night, the corridors grew more complex, each turn leading to another dead end. He came to me exhausted, desperate for control, demanding a solution. I told him, stop trying to escape. Stop running through the corridors like a prisoner seeking the exit. Instead, stand still, listen, allow the labyrinth to reveal its secret. When he did, when he ceased the frantic fight, he discovered a door he had never seen, a passage leading to the center where a fountain flowed. This dream taught him What I could not, that control blinds us to the openings that only surrender can reveal. In myth, the heroes who succeed are not those who dominate life by sheer force, but those who surrender to a higher will. Odysseus survived not because he controlled the sea, but because he listened to the gods, tied himself to the mast, and submitted to forces greater than himself. Christ did not conquer through domination, but through surrender unto death. And in that surrender, the resurrection emerged. The archetypal pattern is clear. The path to wholeness lies not in control, but in relinquishment, in yielding to the greater rhythm of the self. This truth becomes especially clear in the experience of synchronicity. When you release the need to control every outcome, you begin to notice the mysterious coincidences that weave through your life, guiding you with invisible hands. A chance meeting, a book that falls open to the right page, a dream that mirrors your waking dilemma. These are not accidents. They are the language of the self, the secret order that emerges when the ego loosens its grip. Control blinds you to these signs, for the ego insists on its own script, but surrender allows you to participate in the deeper script already being written in the collective unconscious. And here lies a profound paradox. The more you seek to control life, the weaker you become. But the more you surrender, the stronger you are. For strength is not domination, it is alignment. It is the power that flows through you when you are connected to the archetypal energies of the self. Think of the Taoist sages who spoke of wu-wei, effortless action. They understood that the highest master is not forcing but flowing, not controlling but aligning with the Tao, the eternal way. Jungian psychology meets this ancient wisdom in the realization that the self is both within you and beyond you. And life bows when you honor its mystery. Now, let us look at the anima and animus, the inner figures of soul. Many men attempt to control the anima, suppressing the feminine voice. Within that speaks in moods, feelings, and dreams. They fear being overwhelmed by emotion, so they control, rigidify, and cut themselves off from their inner life. But the anima, when controlled, becomes a witch, a séductress, a chaos that undermines the man from within. Only when he ceases to fight, when he honors her as guide, does she transform into a mediatrix of the unconscious, a bridge to creativity and wisdom. Likewise, women who attempt to control their animus, those inner voices of logic, assertion, and spirit, find themselves tormented by opinionated inner tyrants. Only when they seize control and engage the animus in dialogue does he transform into a bearer of meaning and spiritual direction. Life bows when the inner marriage takes place, when control is relinquished and communion is embraced. The archetype of the king teaches us the same. A true king does not control through tyranny, but rules through alignment with the sacred order. When the king insists on control, he becomes a despot, and the kingdom withers. But when he listens to the wisdom of the land, the people and the gods, when he bows before the greater pattern of life, the kingdom flourishes. The king archetype within you demands the same surrender to bow before the self, to cease fighting for control, and thus to rule your life with wisdom. not with fear. You may ask, how then shall I live, if not in control? Live as one in dialogue with life. Live as one who listens to dreams, who honors synchronicities, who feels the movements of shadow and anima, who surrenders not to chaos, but to the deeper order beneath appearances. Live as one who trusts that the unconscious is not an enemy, but a partner. That life itself is not a battleground, but a mystery unfolding in your favor. There is a secret initiation that comes when control collapses. Many resist until a crisis strikes an illness, a betrayal, a failure, and the illusion of control shatters. In that moment of despair, one discovers the deeper ground, the self that carries you when your ego can no longer sustain you. This is why suffering, though feared, often becomes the doorway to individuation. For suffering strips away the armor of control and forces you to bow, and when you bow, life bows back and a new path opens. I tell you this, the deeper self does not demand that you control. It demands that you awaken, and awakening is not achieved through force, but through surrender. To quit fighting for control is to awaken to the mystery that life itself has always been carrying you, that the unconscious has always been shaping you, that the archetypes have always been guiding you. Control was the illusion, surrender the revelation. And so, as you sit here now, listening to these words, you feel the places in your life where you still fight for control. Feel the tension in your body, the anxiety in your chest, the compulsive thoughts that seek to orchestrate the future. Now imagine loosening your grip, releasing the battle. Imagine bowing before the greater self that has been waiting for your surrender. Do you not sense the relief, the spaciousness, the quiet authority that arises? Life bows to you when you bow to it. Because in truth, you and life are not two but one. When the ego relinquishes its obsession with control, a new dimension of experience opens. It is as though a veil is lifted and one perceives that life was never a random sequence of accidents, but a tapestry woven with invisible threads. Yet the threads cannot be seen when you strain to command them. Only when you soften your gaze, when you stop tugging at the fabric, does the pattern emerge. The psyche is infinitely patient, waiting for the moment when you tire of your struggle and finally allow yourself to see. Many resist this surrender, for it feels like death, and in a way, it is a death, the death of the illusion that you are the sole author of your destiny. But death is not the end, it is transformation. The caterpillar must die to its old form to be reborn as a butterfly. So too must the ego die to its fantasy of control, to be reborn as a participant in the self. When you quit fighting, you undergo this inner metamorphosis, and life bows, because you have embraced the law of transformation instead of opposing it. Think of the dreams where you fall endlessly. In waking life, the ego clings to every branch, every ledge, desperate not to fall. But in the dream, the fall continues until you surrender. And then, mysteriously, you are carried by unseen wings, or you land gently on a shore that had been waiting all along. The unconscious teaches what the ego resists, that falling is not destruction but deliverance, provided you do not fight against it. The archetype of the phoenix embodies this truth. The phoenix burns, consumed by flames. It cannot control, yet in the ashes, life bows, and the bird rises renewed. Control would forbid the burning, but surrender allows for resurrection. And so in your own life, the moments you feared would end you, the heartbreak, the failure, the illness, when surrendered to, become the very ashes from which your true self emerges. This surrender is not a single act, but a continuous practice. The ego resurrects itself daily, whispering its desire to dominate. Each day you are invited to bow again, to listen again, to trust again. And each day life responds, sometimes gently, sometimes with storms, but always with the intent to draw you deeper into the mystery. The psyche is not cruel. It is relentless in its devotion to your wholeness. It will strip from you the illusions you cling to, not because it seeks your suffering, but because it seeks your freedom. You must understand, individuation is not the path of control, but the path of reconciliation. It is the uniting of opposites, the integration of shadow and persona, anima and animus, conscious and unconscious. None of this can be achieved by force. Control fractures. But se rendait unit. Control silences the voices within, but surrender allows each voice to speak, and in their dialogue a new harmony is born. Life bows to this harmony, for it reflects the eternal order, the unus mundus, the one world in which spirit and matter, psyche and cosmos, are woven together. I recall a woman who lived in terror of her own imagination. She dreamed of serpents coiling around her, of dark waters rising to engulf her. She fought to control these images, denying them, fearing them, trying to banish them with prayers and rituals. Yet the more she resisted, the more the dreams returned, until her waking life was filled with dread. When finally she surrendered, when she allowed herself to sit with the serpent in her dream, she realized it was not her enemy. It was the ancient symbol of renewal, of Kundalini energy, of the life force coiled at the base of her being. By bowing to the serpent, she awakened to her own vitality, and life began to bow to her, in return opening paths of creativity and love she had long suppressed. Do you see the paradox? The serpent was always there, but her fight for control turned it into a terror. When she quit fighting, the same serpent became a teacher. So it is with all the energies of the unconscious. They bow when you bow. They devour when you resist. This is why myths across cultures tell of heroes who must enter the underworld. They do not conquer it by force. They survive because they surrender to the journey. Orpheus descended not to control Hades, but to listen, to seek. Dante walked through hell not to dominate it, but to behold it. Each myth whispers the same truth. The underworld of the psyche demands reverence, not control. And when reverence is offered, the treasures of transformation are revealed even in the small details of daily life. This principle is present When you try to control another person, the relationship deteriorates, but when you release them, allowing their soul to breathe, love flourishes. When you try to control creativity, demanding it appear on schedule, inspiration dries up. But when you surrender, when you allow space for the muse, creativity flows abundantly. When you try to control your future, anxiety consumes you. But when you bow to the unfolding moment, life reveals synchronicities and possibilities you never imagined. Life bows because you have become its ally instead of its adversary. And yet, let me caution you, surrender is not laziness, nor is it blind passivity. It is a conscious participation with the deeper self. It is the courage to relinquish the illusion of mastery while remaining attentive to the symbols, the dreams, the intuitions that arise. To surrender is to live in dialogue with the unconscious, not to abdicate responsibility, but to expand responsibility beyond the ego into the whole self. Control says, Yalon decide. Surrender says, I participate in a mystery greater than myself. In the language of alchemy, this is the opus contra naturam, the work against the false nature of the ego. The alchemist does not control the process, but tends the fire, waits with patience, allows the opposites to merge in their own time. He surrenders to the slow rhythm of transformation, knowing that gold cannot be forced from base matter. In the same way, your individuation cannot be rushed or controlled. It unfolds as you surrender, as you allow the unconscious to guide you through images, dreams, and synchronicities. The self, that hidden totality within, seeks to reveal itself in your life. But it does so not through your control, but through your surrender. The ego may resist, but the self is patient. It will wait through years, even decades, arranging experiences that humble the ego until it finally releases its grip. And when it does, when the ego bows, life bows in return, because the alignment of ego and self creates a harmony that radiates into the world. So I ask you, where in your life are you still clinging to control? Where are you refusing the bow? Is it in your work, your relationships, your inner life? Notice how these areas are marked by tension, conflict, and exhaustion. Now imagine releasing them. Imagine trusting that the self is already shaping a path beyond what you can see. Imagine bowing before the mystery, and then imagine the relief that comes when life bows back, when the obstacles soften, when the path opens, as if it had been waiting all along. This is not fantasy. It is the law of the psyche. What you fight grows stronger. What you bow to transforms. Control feeds the neurosis. Surrender releases it. Control builds prisons. Surrender opens doors. And the choice lies before you in every moment, to cling or to bow, to fight or to flow, to dominate or to trust. Life will mirror your choice. It will resist when you resist, and it will bow when you bow. When you look carefully at the life you have been trying so hard to control, you will notice how much of it has always been beyond your command. The people you meet, the dreams that arise, the sudden illnesses, the strange blessings, the betrayals, the opportunities, these do not submit to your timetable or your expectations. They erupt, they vanish, they surprise, and yet, when you look backward, you see that they formed a pattern. A painful ending became the beginning of a deeper truth. A closed door redirected you toward a path you would never have chosen. Yet, without it, you would not be who you are. The unconscious has been guiding you all along. Life has been bowing, even in the very moments you thought you were defeated. The greatest illusion is that you are separate from this unfolding mystery. The ego stands apart and says, I must control, but in truth, you are woven into the very fabric you are trying to dominate. You are the river that you resist, the storm you fear, the labyrinth you wander. To surrender is not to give your life away, it is to reclaim it from the fantasy of separation. When you bow, you are bowing not to something alien, but to the self that has been whispering from within since the beginning. Even your suffering is part of this bow. For suffering strips away what is false, tears from you, the masks that prevent communion with the self. When you quit fighting, even suffering bows, transforming into wisdom, the wound becomes the gateway to healing. The scar, the mark of initiation. In myth, the wounded healer is the one who no longer resists his own pain, but carries it as a vessel for compassion. Jung, the immortal centaur, could not control his wound, but in accepting it, he became a teacher of gods and men. So too, your wounds bow when you bow, becoming not chains, but gifts. The collective psyche also reveals this truth. Nations, like individuals, attempt to control, to dominate history, to command the future. Yet every empire that rose by control eventually fell. Those who aligned with a deeper order endured, not by mastery but by participation in the great rhythm of existence. The collective unconscious is patient, correcting the excesses of control with storms of history until humanity remembers its place. And so, even at the scale of civilizations, life bows to surrender, not to domination. Do not mistake this surrender for weakness. It is the highest courage, for it requires you to face the unknown without guarantees. It demands faith, not blind belief, but the faith born of direct experience, the faith that comes when you have bowed and discovered that life bowed in return. Control is a shield against fear, but surrender is the sword that cuts through fear, revealing that fear itself was an illusion, a shadow projected by the ego. And so, in your daily life, the invitation is simple yet profound. Quit fighting for control. Sit with your shadow instead of suppressing it. Listen to your dreams instead of dismissing them. Allow your relationships to breathe instead of imprisoning them with demands. Welcome synchronicities instead of explaining them away. Trust that the self, the archetypal totality within you, knows the path better than your conscious mind. This is not abdication, it is collaboration. It is the ego stepping down from its throne and taking its rightful place as servant of the self. When you live this way, life begins to reveal itself as a dance, not a war. You find that you are moved by forces greater than yourself, and yet those forces are not alien, they are your deeper self. mirrored in the world around you, you find that what you once feared as chaos is actually order beyond comprehension. You find that life bows not because you conquered it, but because you finally recognized it as your companion, your mirror, your teacher. Let me leave you with an image. Imagine a man standing on the shore, fists clenched, demanding that the tide obey him. He shouts at the waves. He draws lines in the sand. He resists with all his might. The sea ignores him, surging forward, washing away his boundaries. He is humiliated, exhausted, enraged. Now imagine the same man releasing his fists, stepping into the tide, allowing the water to lift him. He floats, carried by the same sea that defied him. He discovers that the tide was never his enemy. It was always waiting for him to surrender, to be carried. And now the sea bows, not because it was conquered, but because he has become one with it. So too with your life. Quit fighting, release the illusion, surrender to the self, to the unconscious, to the deeper mystery that has been shaping you from the beginning. Bow, and life will bow in return. And in that mutual bow, you will discover what you were seeking all along, not control, but communion, not domination, but wholeness, not certainty, but the living mystery in which you are forever held.